everybody, Amy here. Just wanted to say hello and bring you sort of our first full video. I wanted to let you know what Restoration Place really is and what we're doing and how we plan on getting there. So Restoration Place is a nonprofit organization based out of Swartz Creek, Michigan. It's our primary goal to open up a home for girls who have been sex trafficked or sexually abused and in the foster care system. We know that more than 60% of those who are trafficked here in the U.S. have experience in the foster care system, so that's a major area that we're working with when it comes to prevention for human trafficking. We also know that more than 90% of those trafficked have a history of early childhood sexual abuse. So those indicators tell us that our high-risk, vulnerable, at-risk youth really belong in these categories of foster care and early childhood sexual trauma. So that's really the focus that we want to remain in. That's really the focus that we want to continue to have when it comes to rescue and restore children of trafficking. Restoration Place intends on building a 6,000 square foot ranch for 12 girls ages 11 to 17. We have 11 acres in a very rural county of Michigan, and we've been fundraising to get about $450,000 to build this ranch. So in the meantime, we have actually become a referral agency, and this sort of just happened by accident. We kept getting calls from Polaris Project and from different agencies around the state. We get calls directly from victims and family members looking for resources in their area. So the last 18 months, we've been able to assist 13 victims of human trafficking directly. And that's been really, really rewarding and wonderful. So we're excited that we could get to continue this service that we do, as well as raising money to open up the home. We also have created a professional seminar program. It's called the Education Human Trafficking Seminars. The programs are accredited nationally for social work, but they also meet the state requirement for all healthcare professionals in the state of Michigan. So whether you're a dentist or a nurse or a physical therapist, our training sessions actually meet the requirement that you need to maintain your licensure in Michigan. Well, I wanted to go over some basics of human trafficking with you. A lot of what we cover in our human trafficking seminars is a lot of the basics. So the first 2 hours of our program covers what human trafficking is, what it looks like, how it's defined, sort of the demographics we're working with and some of the data that goes along with it. Keep in mind that the data for human trafficking just sucks. It's just straight up ridiculous because it's an educated guess. It's an illegal operation, so people don't just, self-disclose. We don't have pimps going, oh, I got 6 girls. They don't disclose. So getting the data accurate on this issue just isn't there. What we have are educated guesses by our national government, by our global entities, by our local officials, but we don't have an accurate number when it comes to human trafficking. We just have an educated range of what we think. So human trafficking, the basics of human trafficking when it comes to the law, the national law here in the United States, it's called the TVPA, or the Trafficking Victims Protection Act, and it was created in the year 2000. Now the TVPA of 2000 actually stated a few things. First of all, people weren't victims unless they were trafficked across international borders before the year 2000. So what happened was our federal government said, we know we have many more domestic victims and domestic traffickers here than we do foreign victims and foreign traffickers. So they created a law that addressed the issue of domestic human trafficking. So what that means is the federal government says one element from each category has to be present. It's got to be an act of, a means of, and a purpose of. So an act of harboring, transporting, providing, obtaining, or selling by the means of force, fraud, or coercion for the purposes of exploitation, involuntary servitude, forced military, or debt bondage. So what that simply means is we've got these different categories lined up, but not all of them have to be present, just one element from each. So I want to focus really on the means of right now. So when we talk about the means, the force, fraud, or coercion, so the way by which traffickers bring victims into human trafficking. So when we talk about force, we're typically talking about that kidnapping piece. When it comes to human trafficking here in the United States, less than 3% of those who are trafficked are actually kidnapped for the purposes of trafficking. Most human trafficking happens through the context of relationship. So when we're talking about human trafficking here in the US, we're talking about relationship. 62% of those who are brought in through the means of fraud and coercion. When we talk about fraud, we're talking about that tricking piece, right? So I promised you a job as a waitress, now you're forced to work as a stripper. I promised you a job as a modeling agent, now you're forced to work in pornography. I promised you would have an amazing life and I would be your boyfriend and your husband forever and you're wonderful, we're going to have this great life together. And then it goes south real fast. That's fraud. That's that tricking piece. When it comes to coercion, we're talking about coercive threats, blackmail, rapes, beatings. All of those things tend to come into play after the grooming process. So the grooming process consists of that very deep, quick psychological, emotional attachment to somebody, and then it goes south, right? So we've got this attachment now, this honeymoon period, this grooming process through fraud and coercion. I tricked you, and now it's turned to threats. That is about 62% of those who are brought into human trafficking are brought in through those means. When it comes to human trafficking here in the U.S., about 35% of those who are trafficked by family. So when we're talking about child abuse cases, when we're talking about domestic violence, when we go in to investigate these cases, you need to look for that element of exploitation. Exploitation simply means somebody's gaining from somebody else's loss of freedom, loss of wages. Always, always, always looking for that element of trade when it comes to human trafficking. So those are some of the basics of human trafficking. That law also stated, when it comes to federal law, the TVPA of 2000, anybody who's under the age of 18 in any kind of commercial sex industry or being forced to work and not getting paid or a very low wage, they're considered a victim of human trafficking if they're under the age of 18. So when we're talking about children, our federal government got it right. And they say, you know what? You don't have the capacity to choose this kind of life. You don't have the capacity to choose this profession, if that's what you want to call it. So what they did was they said, you know what? If you're under the age of 18, you're entitled to all the same resources and services as any other victim. And you don't have to prove force, fraud, or coercion. You don't have to take your trafficker to court. You don't have to testify against your pimp. You're entitled to all the same services and resources. When it comes to the state of Michigan and 25 additional states around the country, we don't match up with this law. We still here in the state of Michigan pick up and prosecute children for prostitution. So here in the state of Michigan, our law states if you're 16 or 17 years old and you are picked up for this kind of activity, it's up to each individual judge and jurisdiction to determine whether or not you're put on probation or you're charged outright with the crime. If you're put on probation, you cannot have any kind of recidivism. So you can't be picked up for shoplifting or drug use or running away. And we know with this population, because we're talking about, remember, foster care, early childhood sexual abuse, oftentimes substance abuse. We know with this population, this vulnerable at-risk population, recidivism is almost a given. And when that happens, all those charges get tacked back on. So if you're seeing the news and you're like, oh, I kind of get that it's this, but why did the 17-year-old get prosecuted? Check to see if it's a local case. So those are some of the basics of human trafficking. I don't want to give you too much tonight, so if you have any questions, just drop me a line, and we'll check you later. Bye-bye.